Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, January 6th, 2026, and our dear friend, our brother, Colonel Jacques Baud, is here with us. Welcome back, Colonel.
Thank you, Nima. Hi, and thank you for inviting me again, despite my sanctions. Yeah, you're not afraid of the EU. That's good. Um,
Yeah.
you'll probably be qualified as a pro-Russian media, but it's okay. Probably, I don't know.
Yeah. Colonel, I think many of our audience, please hit the like button, helping us reaching more people. And Colonel, many of our audience are interested to know what's going on with your case and with the sanctions on you. And what is the latest events that you can share with us?
Well, first of all, people have to realize that my case is a unique case. Now, many people have been sanctioned by the European Union, but this case is absolutely unique. First of all, because these sanctions are designed as foreign policy measures, and since I'm living within the EU, that's the first time you have someone living in the European Union who is subject to sanctions, to foreign policy measures. And that has consequences because when you formulate those sanctions, of course, since they are targeting people, maybe terrorists or whoever outside of the European Union, of course, you don't have the same legal framework as you might have within the EU. And therefore, when they applied the sanctions to me, they applied as if I were a terrorist in Syria. That means that these sanctions are applied without any accepted or law-based work in the Europe. And that's the reason why you have then the second layer of that is that in the EU, basically, with my case, it shows that within the EU, you can deprive someone from its liberty, its freedom of movement, its freedom of feeding, I mean, freedom of living, basically, because since I'm not allowed to access my bank accounts, I'm not able to buy even food. I'm not even able to to pay my bills or electricity or whatever. Therefore, you without any trial, without having breached any law, without having been confronted to any open accusation, without having been able to defend myself, not even to justify myself, I'm deprived of freedom, I'm deprived of food, I'm deprived from everything that allows to live. Right now, I'm living out of the solidarity of my neighbors, of people who bring me food. Because since the 15th of December, I'm not able to buy food. And there is no reaction from the Belgian government, although the Belgian government knows that I'm a resident. My main residence is in Belgium. They know it. I'm a registered resident. Switzerland knows it because they know I'm registered to the Swiss embassy in Brussels, meaning they know it, but they haven't taken any measures to help me. They just called me to say that we are in contact. That's the only thing they have provided so far, and the EU knows it. And of course, France, which is the country that apparently put me on that list. So, well, you can argue that maybe they have not understood that as they took the decision. Well, that then asks the question of how France take its decision, how French intelligence is capable of providing information on someone in the European Union. There is an interesting video that has been made at the German parliament, because out of the 60 or so people who are on the list of sanction of the 15th of December, journalists have specifically taken my name because precisely I'm a unique case, and they asked the German government, why did you approve Jacques Baud on the sanction? And the representative of the German government, well, obviously he's very embarrassed. You can see the video, it's on the YouTube. He looks very embarrassed and he said, well, we didn't know, but in fact, we are convinced it's right. That's it. So that means that they take decisions without even knowing if it's justified, without understanding the consequence of that. And beyond the whole thing, I mean, obviously, my personal life is definitely affected and impacted. But beyond that, we see that the decision making that leads to such quite important decision is totally done by chance. It's we in French we call it's wet finger decision making. You know, when you wet your finger and you put it in the wind, and that's exactly that. They have no idea of what they are doing. They're just approving things, and that shows, in fact, the weakness, the fundamental weakness of decision making within the EU. And I'm sure that people didn't even realize that the consequences of my case. I personally think that it's my own theory. I cannot be sure about this. I think, or let's say, my theory is that I was not directly targeted. In fact, the since allegedly the sanction or the request for the sanction on me was made by the French government. The French government wanted to sanction another French citizen who is basically, I mean, it's half French, half Russian. He lives in Moscow and is managing RT programs or things like that. My personal view is that the French government wanted to target him as a main target. The problem is that since this would be the first case or the first occasion in which the French government would apply a sanction on a French citizen, they had to dilute the issue and they had to find a secondary, a collateral damage, if you want. And I consider myself as a collateral damage in that case. I'm not sure I was the main target, but the French government had to justify a broader purpose for the sanction than just targeting uh, um, Xavier Moreau, who is the targeted person, who is, from political point of view, very opposed to the current French government. And that's my view. That so that means that we have here a sequence of decisions, of a sequence of, let's say, measures that are completely inappropriate for my case. I am here a victim of misunderstanding, mismanagement, mis decision making. I mean, this is, and as I said before, this is, in my view, an expression of the weakness of the decision making within the EU, done by people who are incompetent, who don't know what they are talking about, who are immature. This is something we have said many times, and that's just an additional confirmation of that. So, again, and when I see the reaction that my case has triggered all over the world, I can say that the EU has certainly not improved its own situation. I mean, it's obviously shot in its own feet. So again, we are back to things that we have said many times regarding the geopolitical situation. that the EU is basing its judgment not on thorough analysis of things, but on a very superficial analysis. I mean, not even analysis; it's perception of things rather than analysis. And at the end, they don't even measure the consequence of the decisions. I mean, we have discussed that many times with the ban of natural gas from Russia or from other places and all that. So we see that people take decisions without measuring the mid or long term impact of these decisions. And that's the hallmark of I would say teenagers' decision making. You know, when you're not able to elaborate a view on what would be the incidence and the consequences of your decision in the middle long term, you can seriously question the capabilities of the people who make these decisions. And we are here a blatant example. So that's where I am in the moment. Now I'm of course preparing the counterattack because I have to defend myself. So I'm in touch with lawyers to address the problem. The difficulty is, as I said, this is not a legal decision. This decision has not been taken by any court. I've never been trialed for the things I'm accused of, namely propaganda or being on pro-Russian website or things like that. First of all, nobody can define exactly what is propaganda. There is a there even the accusation entails a kind of conspiracy theory because they imagine that there are agents network that operate for Russia and things like this. You know, I have no connection with Russia whatsoever. So where did they find the ideas, indications of any kind of network? This is pure conspiracy theory from A to Z. In addition to the fact that propaganda, even if I were doing propaganda, which I deny, I said that, and it's written in all my books that I don't want to make any propaganda for any party on any conflict. In any case, even if I were making propaganda, propaganda is not forbidden by law, by any law. There is no law that prohibits making propaganda. There are laws against when defamation, when you accuse someone of something he didn't do, or you are not allowed to insult people. You are no, you're not allowed. But this is beyond the point. This is beyond propaganda and all that. So there is no law that defines what I'm accused of. Even being on pro-Russian website. What is that? Is your website, for instance, is your channel a pro-Russian channel? You know, nobody knows exactly what it means. So we are here with a very fuzzy accusation, which is basically a conspiracy theory in itself. So and as I said, this is a political decision. In fact, it's not a legal decision, and that makes the defense or my defense more, because at the end of the day, this decision was taken not by a court but by the Council of Foreign Minister of the EU, and they did that with the unanimity rule, meaning that you have 27 people and all those 27 had to be to agree, even if they didn't know who I was. But now you have to do that backwards, and that's much more difficult. So there's a political process, and there's also a legal process, because you can go through the European Union Court, the Court of Justice of the European Union, the European Court of Justice, sorry, the European Court of Justice, and explain the case and saying that the decision was not right, and therefore, with the decision of the court, you can probably try to influence what the minister could decide in the future and maybe remove me from the sanctioned list. But this will take a lot of time because the European Court of Justice is only a bunch of civil servants, and they are not obviously not in a hurry to solve the case. So that's where I am at this stage. In addition to that, you have a lot of people who take advantage of this accusation to add their own conspiracy theory, and these are, let's say, side battlefields, and we'll fight that also because obviously they can only harm the main issue. So that's where I am at this stage. In the meantime, as I said, since the 15th of December, I'm under sanctions. So since the 15th, I'm basically living out of the solidarity of my neighbors.
Hmm. Colonel, shifting the gear to what's going on in Venezuela and in the United States, we know that the Trump administration has decided to kidnap the president of Venezuela and bring it to the United States to face justice, as they call it. But when you look at the whole case, kidnapping a president, the president of Venezuela, and I I don't know what else can be done to just destroy the international law. But in the case of the international law, when you look at the whole situation with Venezuela, what comes to your mind, and how can we understand this sort of you know action on the part of the president of the United States, who's one of the most powerful presidents on this planet?
Well, obviously, there's a multiplicity of issues there. In my book on governing on fake news, I addressed the question of Venezuela during the first mandate of President Trump, with the whole issue of Juan Guaido and all that. And I went digging into the whole issue of who were the election at that time, or how the legality of the Maduro government and all that. And in fact, it's very interesting because what I exposed already at that time is that the US already at that time tried to fabricate literally a case against Venezuela. And we have found exactly the same thing today. The, the whole, before going into the specifics, we are here addressing something that we have addressed many times, but probably people have not understood the real scope of that. In fact, this shows exactly that we have shifted from the international law based order to the international rules based order. It's no longer the law that constitutes the reference point when you assess a situation. They are rules, rules which are defined by whoever, in that case, by the US. Obviously, this is the most aggressive country. It has the power of being aggressive. It has the presence, military presence all over the world. It uses also all the clandestine assets, CIA and others, to influence things. And that's probably what happened in Venezuela, by the way, this case. Well, I don't want to discuss all the specifics because I haven't studied that in all details. But apparently, what the current situation has shown is that people were bribed, or you had some kind of, in fact, corruption done by the US in order to obtain the removal of President Maduro. But all that is based not on international law, because obviously this would be prohibited by international law, but is in fact, authorized by the rules which are defined by the US. And that's where we see, for instance, you have some accusations that have been um, established yes, established by the U.S. government, namely this famous cartel of the Suns, or I don't remember exactly the name of this cartel, that allegedly Maduro was leading or coordinating or whatever. And now that Maduro is in the U.S., he's facing trial. They have dropped that charge, and they even said that this cartel never existed. So it shows that they completely fabricated the case from A to Z. And you will see again, we started this program with my personal case, and of course, I'm not, not a case as important as Maduro, but you have some similarities here that you just fabricate a case just to make your point. It's no longer the law that is the reference. It's just the rules that you establish. That's exactly the human rights, in my case, would define that or oblige any country, because every country, or normally in the EU, has some rules to deprive someone from basic freedoms. But this has not been applied. So we are not in the field of the law. We are in the field of the rules that have been defined arbitrarily without any consent from from the consent of the population. So these are rules established by a ruling party or camarilla, clique, junta, you can call it as you want, not elected, who decide the rules. And that's exactly what we have. And that's exactly what we have here in Venezuela as well. So what this case demonstrates, and I can, of course, it's in the situation where I am, I relate, although they are substantially distinct, but in essence, it comes back to the same lawlessness in which we are right now. That everybody, I mean, this is the law of the strongest, period. You define who is good and who is bad. It's not the legality that defines the right, it's the legitimacy. Legality is, well, when you follow the law, and the law has the red lines, and if you cross the red lines you are out of the law. It's as simple as that. I mean, the line may be wider or thinner, depend on the case, but as a principle, the law defines the limits of what you're allowed to do, and when you cross the limits, then you are out of the law. That's the legality or illegality. When you talk about legitimacy or illegitimacy, you are talking about not the legality, but the perception of legality. Even if you can say a country, and now we are talking about Venezuela, but we may well be talking about Iran in a couple of weeks from now. You know, Iran has different, I mean, or Venezuela or Iran may have different laws, different practices, different customs in their political system, in the way they elect people, the way the country is ruled, and all that. We define, we tend to say that even if it is legal in the country, we say it's illegitimate because population cannot say this or that. As I said many times, I'm come from Switzerland. Switzerland is, let's say, it's considered as a democratic country because we vote for almost every important decision. The population votes for that through referendums. And of course, we decide on almost everything, country. We decide on if we should build a new highway, a tunnel in the Alps, or raise the taxes, or buy a new aircraft. We even voted to dismantle or to disband the army. Well, the population refused that, but I mean, we even voted for that. So we vote for everything. Now, if I look at France, for instance, which is just a country just next door, they claim to be democratic, but when I see the decision they take, which are not supported by the population, which are only supported by a clique of politicians, often corrupt, who even go to prison because of corruption, by the way, what is, they claim to be democratic, but this is not the same democracy as we have in Switzerland. So, what is the baseline to measure democracy? The system in France is probably legal. I mean, probably not corruption, but let's say the system is legal. But with Swiss eyes, I could say, well, it's not legitimate because it doesn't respect the will of the population. Because with my eyes, I have a certain point of view that allows me to adjust the perception of the system in France. So France claim to be democratic, but I have said many times, and I wrote that in my books. For me, France is not a democracy; it's an elective monarchy. Period. You just elect the king. This is, and if you look at the structure of France, by the way, you would say that it's almost the same structures as the one you had under the monarchy. So, as you see, think like this: when you have Maduro kidnapped by the U.S. government, what is the reaction in Europe? Not any outrage in Europe. Surprisingly, they claim to be Democrat. They claim to follow the law and the rule of law and all that. But when it comes to the kidnapping of Maduro, what is the reaction of the EU? They just say Maduro was not legitimate. They don't say he was not legal. They are not legitimate, meaning it's a matter of perception. And again, we are here in the field of perception. We are not in the field of what is measurable, what can be defined through articles of law and things like this. We are into something which is undefined. Legitimacy is not really defined. Is that the polls that define the legitimacy? And as you know, if let's assume it's that, but we everybody knows that the polls may give different results depending on to whom you ask the question. So what is legitimacy? You and but that's the reaction we have in Europe. It's not based on law, it's based on rules. And that's the evolution we are seeing today, I think, in the world. And that's extremely concerning because that means that the decisions are in fact based on arbitrary uh, the arbitrary decisions, not based on something that you can verify, but based on something which is moving depending on who decides. And and that's where we are with the whole issue of the sanctions and all that, not just for my case, by the way, but for everything we have, because now we see also that instead of going through diplomatic processes or negotiation processes, we apply sanctions. It's a policy of coercion everywhere. And that applies, by the way, to Switzerland as well. I mean, Switzerland is the the second country that sanctions the most Russia. I mean, the first being the United States, the second is Switzerland, and then you have the European Union also. I mean, this may have changed, but that's the status of August last year. It may have changed in between, but nevertheless, even if it's a third one, you don't expect to see Switzerland as a sanctioning country, especially because it's neutral, and especially also not just because it's neutrality, but also because the mere existence and the mere purpose, I would say almost, of Swiss foreign policy was precisely to stay in the middle, to be to provide an opportunity for different parties to talk together. Once you take the position of one party, you can no longer be the mediator in that, and that's where we see this very strong change, and Switzerland is very a symbol of that. But beyond the case of Switzerland, it's something we have witnessed since all the conflict. We have talked many times about the conflict in Palestine, for instance, and even with Iran, we have mentioned that. We know that actions of Israel were illegal and even illegitimate, by the way. But what was the reaction of the EU? No reaction. So they have this kind of flexible understanding of the situation. Sometimes, when it suits them, they condemn violation of international law, and when it doesn't suit them, they don't do anything. And when they cannot improve things, and when they don't have the capacity or the capability to address a situation as we used to in the past, through diplomacy, through foreign relation and all that, they just apply sanctions. And in fact, that's exactly what we have. We have just an extreme case with Venezuela, but in substance, it's exactly that. Do what I told you to do, otherwise I'll kidnap your president. Otherwise, I'll impose sanctions on you. Otherwise, I will send my troops. I will overthrow your government and things like this. You know, today we are talking about Denmark. Is the government of Denmark is certainly legal, but is it legitimate? Is the government of Denmark legitimate? Does the US consider the government of Denmark as legitimate? They fabricated a cartel for the purpose of indicting Maduro. They can fabricate another cartel for the president of Denmark. What would be the difference? And that's where we are. We are in a system which is in fact a scheme which is extremely close to organized criminality, where you define the rules because you are the strongest. The rule of law that was created at the end of World War II, I mean, not the rule of law, the international law system that emerged out of World War II, was precisely designed to avoid that a powerful actor could impose its will on others. Of course, this powerful actor at that time was Germany. Germany had been more or less, I mean, I said more or less because historians may discuss that, but in any case, Germany was considered as the initiator of two world wars. And the idea was to prevent that such a case could emerge again. And therefore, the international law was built in such a way that nobody could emerge as, uh, let's say, as a power that could impose its will. The problem is that with the years, and especially because after the end of the Cold War, Russia in particular, but also China, were not as powerful as the West and especially the US. They were not able to play the role that they were supposed to play in this international law system in the Security Council of the UN. You know, the Security Council of the UN was crafted at the end of World War II, where you had the winners. I mean, basically, these were the winners of World War II, meaning that they were the most powerful nations. And they were supposed to remain powerful and to have a balance of power within the Security Council. Doesn't mean that the system was perfect, but it allowed to have some kind of balance and allowed to have the let's say this international law system working at least during the Cold War. At the end of the Cold War, as the US emerged as the most powerful country in the world, not just because of the economy, but also because of its worldwide military presence. Nota bene, the US military is, I think, the only military in the world which is organized around worldwide structures. You see, most countries have divisions, army corps, but the US forces are arranged around continent, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Eastern Asia, and so on and so forth. So it's the structure of the armed forces is of the US is already organized around in a global manner. But and at the end of the Cold War, as I said, Russia was definitely weakened and it's recovering now, but it took almost 30 years to have the, let's say, a significant presence. And that's why now the Americans start to respect Russia. Almost the same way with China. China had a very a slow development up to the year 2000s, and since the year 2000s it has an accelerating development. uh, but at the end of the Cold War, China was still almost a developing country. You may remember those pictures of all those people with bicycles in Beijing and all that. All of them having the same kind of outfit and things like this. Today, if you look at the Chinese society, it's totally different from the one we had even 30 years ago. Meaning that just after the end of the Cold War, the US could take advantage of the supremacy it had, and it started to build its power at that time. And today, the US power starts to be challenged by the Russian one and the Chinese one. And that's create the conflict, let's say not the conflict, direct conflict, because the US start to understand, but it feeds this idea of making America great again. And probably this is one of the rationale behind the willingness of the US to take control over the whole of the so-called Western Hemisphere, which is essentially the American continent. So that's the mechanics of the whole thing. The problem is that Security Council and the international law system suffered from that because within the UN, the US decides. They are the main contributor. And I have been several years working for the UN, and you can see that basically almost the US decide almost everything. They are present everywhere because they pay for everything. And if the UN, when the Kofi Annan, for instance, um, expressed the idea of restructuring the UN and having coming back to something which is more equal, if you want, to have to come back to the real international law system, if you want. Um, That was opposed by the US, and they said, well, if you do that, we don't pay anymore. And the UN lives essentially on what the US is paying for the UN, meaning that the US has an enormous power in that, as it has in NATO, as it has. That's the reason why, even if the Europeans want to have their own European defense system, they cannot avoid the US the US support, because the US has become instrumental in NATO. This is the primus inter pares into NATO. So that's a problem. Now we are under the US rule for everything. So as long as the US is reasonable and works according to international law, well, it's not a problem having the US being the major power. But once it starts to disregard international law and to say that essentially the US must dictate what the rest of the world is doing, then of course you run into a problem. And that's exactly the situation in which we are. The the purpose of the whole thing is again to make America great again. But instead of making America great again through competition, to be better than the others, to perform better, to be more innovative, to be more creative, to have better engineering, to have to offer better product, cheaper product, and so on and so forth. The US is no longer able to do that. So what they do, they try to impose their will to others because they have no other means to compete with others. And that's a little bit the danger of the current situation, because if you look at the Europe, for instance, is no competition for the US whatsoever. Europe claimed to be, and essentially, potentially, Europe could be one of the major powers in the world because, first of all, it's a continent that has a huge population. It has a huge potential in terms of engineering, creativity, and all that. It has demonstrated that in the past. But the problem is that these today we see it's very blatant with the current leadership of the EU. They pay more attention to weaken Russia than to develop Europe. And that's again a lack of strategic understanding, and a lack of a strategic view on what Europe should do. Again, they are doing almost the same as the US is doing. Instead of being better than the others, they try to keep the others down. If in a competition you have two ways of winning, you make it better, you are better than the others, you are the best, and that's the best way to win the competition. But the other way is that you stay as you are, but you try to weaken the others. You try to keep the others down. That's the negative aspect. So you emerge as the leader somehow, but not by improving yourself, but by destroying the others. And that's exactly what the US is doing. And that's exactly what the Europe is doing as well. The only one who have understood the idea that this idea of competition, that they need to be better, are the Chinese. And that's where the Chinese come into the game. They are more creative, more innovative. They issued, this is the country that provides those patents every year. They produce more engineers every year than any other country. They have the highest university. They produce most scientific papers than any other country. The problem is that it's written in Chinese, so nobody reads them, but they are there and they have extremely high quality. But since we don't want to learn Chinese, well, they speak English, they speak French, they speak German, but we don't speak Chinese. As a result, they have an edge. They are better, and they can understand what we do while we cannot understand what they do. And we are exactly in that scheme. The Chinese are now the most innovative, and look around when you see emerging technologies, new technologies, as we say, design. Look at the design of cars, look at the design of appliances or whatever. The Chinese have definitely an edge today. A few years ago, you had Japan or other European countries that were very good at designing objects and things like that. Today is China. The early Chinese cars were ugly. Today they are extremely attractive. They have very nice design and all that. A lot of features. They can produce at a very low cost. As a result, they are better. And on the other side, Europe has not been able to develop anything. Look at look at AI. The Chinese had operationalized AI. We don't. And it's interesting the way we do it. I mean, we use AI to answer question on Google and to establish nice CVs or light dissertations and things like this. The Chinese have implemented AI in industrial processes. They have these called these windowless factories. Um, you know, they are dark factories because they don't need light because everything is done by robots. So they just put some piece of sheets of metal at the beginning, and the car is coming at the other end. Period. Everything is done by robots because with the use of artificial intelligence, they have operationalized this, and that reduces, of course, the costs. That improves the living standard and all that. Europe has not understood that yet. So we are trying to keep the other down instead of raising ourselves. And the US is doing exactly that. I mean, all these countries, I mean, you are probably more familiar with Iran, but Venezuela is another case in point. These are countries which are not essentially adverse to the US. They are ready to work with the US. And you know the Iranian population better than me. It's many Iranian friends, but these are not people who are adverse to the West, adverse to Europe, adverse. On the contrary, they're very open to that. They have simply different cultural references and different way of living and different understanding of the world, but they're very open to the Western world. And it would be extremely easy to integrate them into I would say, the Western world. But we don't do that because we have decided once for all that these were renegade countries. We don't know exactly why. We don't know. It relates to events that are probably 40 years, 40, 50 years old. But this is it. And today we have not evolved beyond this. As a result, we still consider that they are renegade. Of course, you have other aspects, especially with Iran when it comes to the conflict with Israel. But essentially, this is the same problem, but just more focused on the issue of Israel. In any case, it would be extremely easy to bring those people within the Western world and to understand that they are legitimate, but we don't do that because and that's why we use the word legitimacy, because that's something that suits every kind of policy. Legitimacy, what is legitimacy? I mean, if I say that you are illegitimate, then what can you say, you know? uh, And that's exactly the problem we have here. We, instead of using diplomacy, instead of using dialogue, instead of trying to understand each other, to see the benefits, to have some kind of win-win situations, we have decided once of all that we cannot talk to these people. We have even invented issues. That was, I mean, I mentioned Maduro, but now comes to my mind, we had the same case with Soleimani. When Soleimani was killed, a lot of people said he was supporting Al Qaeda terrorists. Well, that's totally wrong. I mean, Soleimani was even thanked by the US to help the US in fighting against jihadi terrorism in the 80s. So you see, but we build the case just to suit a policy. And that's exactly what I said, what we have said during the whole this whole program. We are no longer in the area of law. We are in the area of the rules that have been defined arbitrarily to suit a policy without understanding what are the long term incidents of that. And for that reason, we create more problem than we create solutions. And that starts with the case of Jacques Baud. It ends with the case of Maduro or probably with others, but this is exactly the same principle. Instead of having a rational decision making based on facts, based on law, law is a fact. You know, this is something you cannot invent law. It's there, period. Legitimacy is something that you is not there. It's something that you can adjust to your policy. And that's exactly where we are. So we what we are witnessing here, it's of course a demonstration of power of the US, but at the same time it's a demonstration of weakness because it shows that the US has no longer the ability to impose itself through rational approach of things. It is obliged to invent case against Maduro. It was obliged to invent some kind of cartel that doesn't exist. So that's exactly the expression of fundamental weakness. When you are not able to impose yourself through your intelligence, your ability to be better than others, well, then you just need to be worse than the others. And that's exactly what this case demonstrates.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I didn't interrupt you because I wanted to let you go to full scale description of your understanding of what's going on. I'm so happy that you have mentioned every detail in your assessment. And that was amazing, Carl. And we are always pleased to have you on. Great pleasure as always, Carl.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me again. And thank you for the
Have a
support
great
of
one.
everybody because I take this opportunity also to address your audience because a lot of people from your audience and other audiences as well have expressed their support to my case. And that's something I'm very grateful for.
Yeah. Carl, you didn't send us the link to put it in the description. Please send us the links of those websites who are trying to facilitate the situation for you, trying to help you
Yes,
to put in the
I will.
description of this video.
This is the reason I haven't sent the link so far is that there are still something. I mean, they're still working on that. This will
Mm.
be probably this week. This will be finished. We had this pause during the holidays, and now this will probably be operational. So as soon as I have the links, I will send them to you, and so you will be able to
Thank you.
provide any kind of
Thank you.
support. Thank you very
And
much to
once
all of
I
you.
get the links, I would put them in the description of the all videos that we've done so
Excellent. Thank
far.
you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carl, for being with us today. I hope that you solve these sort of problems, these sort of sanctions that they're imposing on you, and yeah, it's
Well,
all
me
we
too.
can do. Yeah.
Me too. Thank you very much. That's very nice from you, and thank you to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel. See you soon. Bye bye.
See you.